The Ottoman Empire lasted from 1299 to 1922, 623 years. It conquered Constantinople, threatened Vienna, twice controlled the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and produced some of the most dangerous family dinners in human history, because every Ottoman sultan had sons, lots of sons, and every son was a potential civil war. The Ottomans believed succession disputes weakened the empire. Historically speaking, they were correct. So they developed a remarkably direct solution. When a new sultan took the throne, he killed his brothers. Officially, legally, ceremonially, this was considered efficient governance. Most European monarchies followed primogeniture. The eldest son inherits the throne, Sibyl system, terrible sons occasionally. But simple, the Ottomans did something different. Every son of the sultan had a claim, which meant every succession became a race. The moment a sultan died, his sons rushed toward Constantinople. Whichever prince reached the capital first, secured the army, the treasury, and the palace, became sultan. The others usually became dead. Princes raised private armies, governors changed sides, janissaries gambled on favorites, brothers strangled brothers, uncles strangled nephews. Sometimes fathers preemptively strangled everybody. The empire spent decades trapped in succession wars. Then Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople, decided to formalize things, which somehow made it worse. Mehmed II became sultan at 19 years old. 2 years later, he conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire after nearly 1,500 years. He was brilliant, cultured, spoke multiple languages, collected books, patronized Renaissance artists. He also legalized the murder of royal siblings. In his imperial law code, the Kanun-e Mehmed included a clause stating, "Not secretly, not unofficially, not as palace intrigue, as policy." The phrase used was Nizam-i-Alam, the order of the world. The logic was brutally simple. One dead prince prevents 10,000 dead soldiers. Kill a few brothers now, or fight a civil war later. The Ottomans chose efficiency, repeatedly. This was considered responsible government. Like the Mongols before them, the Ottomans developed ceremonial rules around royal blood. Sultans and princes were not supposed to bleed publicly, so executions were usually carried out using silk cords. The men assigned this task were often deaf mutes, not metaphorically. Actual deaf mutes, partly for secrecy, partly so they could not repeat what they heard, partly because the Ottoman court occasionally resembled a very expensive nightmare. The execution itself was quiet, no swords, no spectacle, no public trial, just silk, pressure, and palace servants who had done this before, many times before. Sultan Mehmed III reportedly ordered the execution of 19 brothers after taking the throne in 1595. 19, some were children. Contemporary accounts describe tiny coffins leaving Topkapi Palace in a procession. The empire mourned formally, then continued governing, because civil war had been avoided, technically. By the 17th century, even the Ottomans began to feel the system was becoming excessive. Killing every prince created practical problems. Mostly equally, you run out of princes, so the empire introduced a new solution, the Kafes, the cage. Instead of killing rival princes, the Ottomans locked them away for decades inside the palace, not a dungeon, worse. The Kafes was comfortable, soft carpets, servants, concubines sometimes, books, food, music, and absolutely no freedom. Princes could spend 40 years inside without ever leaving. Watching brothers become sultans, watching nephews replace brothers, waiting for footsteps outside the door, wondering whether they meant coronation or execution. Isolation destroyed many of them psychologically. Some developed paranoia, some obsessions, some could barely speak by the time they inherited the empire. Unfortunately, these men would later become absolute rulers of millions of people. This was considered an improvement. Ibrahim spent years inside the Kafes watching his brothers disappear one by one. At any moment, he expected palace officials to arrive with silk cords. Instead, one morning, they arrived with the throne. According to Ottoman chroniclers, Ibrahim initially refused to come out. He believed it was a trap, which, historically speaking, was an extremely reasonable assumption. Officials reportedly had to show him his brother's corpse before he accepted that he was now sultan. Years of confinement had not prepared Ibrahim particularly well for governance. His reign became infamous for instability, erratic behavior, and palace excess. European diplomats described him as mentally unwell. Ottoman officials described him as difficult. History remembers him as Ibrahim the Mad, which is perhaps unfair. After all, most people locked in palace isolation for decades would probably not emerge emotionally balanced. Over time, another problem emerged. The Janissaries, the elite Ottoman military corps, realized they could influence succession themselves. If princes were isolated, dependent, and psychologically fragile, they were easier to control. Sultans were deposed, grand viziers executed, princes elevated and removed like pieces on a board. The empire that once terrified Europe increasingly became trapped inside its own palace politics. The succession system designed to prevent instability had simply moved the instability indoors. This was also considered governance. The Ottoman Empire survived for centuries, longer than the Mongol Empire, longer than Napoleon, longer than most states in human history. But systems built on fear eventually create rulers who fear everything. The princes and the Kafes learned survival, not leadership, suspicion, not confidence, silence, not governance. By the 19th century, the empire was called the sick man of Europe. Not because it lacked armies, but because institutions built around paranoia eventually began consuming themselves. The Ottoman Empire finally ended in 1922. The palace remained, the Bosphorus remained, the silk cords remained in museum collections, the brothers did not. For centuries, Ottoman princes waited behind doors wondering whether they would become sultan or a problem to be solved. History rarely offers healthy career paths. That's episode 4 of Grim Tales. The Ottoman Empire gave the world extraordinary architecture, complex legal systems, coffee culture across Europe, and one of history's longest-lasting imperial governments. It also turned succession into a legally sanctioned elimination tournament. History contains multitudes. Next week, the Aztecs' approach to human sacrifice. The Aztecs believed the sun would die if they stopped feeding it human hearts. So every morning became a race against the apocalypse. Stotspers. Leave a comment with where Grim Tales should go next, and if you're still here, you know what you are.